Hello, welcome to Space. Charley Lee, my friend and second time guest.
Yeah.
It's been a year, Charley. You've had a flippin' wild time, so have I.
And you, my friend, yeah.
Yeah, last time we spoke was awakening to mental health after COVID-19.
Yeah.
And it was a very timely conversation before you set off on another road. I think you moved somewhere and moved jobs and a lot of things. And I went on my wild journey to staying with my parents in Athens and coming here and getting together with Hannah and making a new life in Berlin.
And now we are both here in Berlin, which is hilarious.
So, yeah, a lot of energetic potential under the conversation, but I feel want to gently meander and wander our way into this space. And by that I don't just mean the space of this room, but the space of the conversation and the space of everything that's happened in the past year and the real complexity and confrontation with the unknown that has come into pretty much everybody's lives. And you've been playing a big role in answering some of the questions around how do we respond to that. And what is the felt reality of that? You as a therapist, in some ways, you know, helping pull the threads together and keep things a little more coherent and steady during some very choppy and turbulent times.
Yeah, for everyone, like including myself.
Yes.
Yeah, which is, certainly the challenge. Also, I guess the beauty of the journey in many ways. And I think it's so good to be here with you, just to come in. I was watching our last talk earlier, and to think of the contexts that we were in and some of the things that we were talking about, like, you know, I was literally sat in an apartment on my own in Birmingham city centre, and we were just going into the pandemic, and I think you were in Athens at the time.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting hearing us talking back, and one thing that we were talking about was like chaos and how to move with chaos and what it means to step into the unknown. And from actually, I think it just got me so present to how many different realities could have occurred from that moment in our conversation, and how different the journey could have been for me or maybe you if there hadn't been like a willingness to kind of just dance with the chaos. That was just a big reflection to talk about at some point.
Yeah, chaos definitely intervened in my experience at different times, and I think I almost found chaos to be a bit of a teacher.
Yeah.
Like the interventions of the unknown and the interventions of the challenge would come at just the right rate that I could possibly digest them and grow from them, and also correspondent with who I am, like the challenge that I face is going to be the challenge that meets me where I am challenged. So yeah, I had a lot of residual anxiety still in my body during that year. And so I remember telling you in that conversation that I had like 2 or 3 instances of thinking I had COVID-19, getting into a like, you know, one of those states where you think you're sick and then you sort of self-create it. And each time I came to the end of that, I realized, oh, this was actually an emotional anxiety, and dropping into that and then releasing it and being relieved, and suddenly this pathological fear that I was going to something bad was going to happen, that went away because I had found the ground underneath. And this was one of the many teachers of the past year.
And to be honest, I think tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people will resonate with that fear that you experienced, and that heightened level of anxiety and awareness that came with the pandemic. I think it was a psychological battle zone for so many people. So people will resonate with that a lot.
Like psychological war zone. In many different ways. I think, Zach Stein in his paper, the war broke out in heaven, or the war in heaven, he kind of talked about COVID as the apocalypse in the sense of a revealing of things. And I think part of that psychic landscape, let's say, part of what COVID brought in was actually a revealing of all of the many other things that are psychically destabilizing and imbalancing for us. Life in the city, for example, was really revealed, I think, sort of stripped bare of its glamour and distractions.
Yes.
And you were just left with, this is what it feels like as a human being
in a city.
To be in a city, surrounded by people and not necessarily connected with anyone. So what do you, this is just coming up for me, building on that psychic war zone metaphor. Like, what is the role then, like, of you as a psychotherapist, but perhaps as individuals who are really getting deep into their own journey and developing their sense making, becoming that speaker of truth and becoming that person who can be ground for others. Like, what is that? Is that like an army chaplain? Is there a kind of distributed shamanic emerging leadership? I've talked about like leadership from the center as an idea of leadership, from the center of the body, of the ground, of the heart, but also a notion that like our agency and power and responsibility is like we're always the center of that web. And so how we are responding, holding the emotions, taking care of others, but also, doing that artful boundary with others as part of that. What do you think of that? Like, there's a kind of thing that I'm trying to give form to here, but it's a little bit shabby, and we need to put some more words on it to really figure out what it is.
No, I totally hear where you're coming from. I think the thing that comes up for me is yeah, like the big thing that this has taught me is like humility and bringing, like, it's the whole microcosm thing, right? Like really coming into my internal world and being completely honest with myself. Like when we spoke last year, I remember before I came into that call, I just had, you know, a session with a client. I was doing so much work. I was on the brink of burnout. I was holding all this space. My needs were being shoved down left, right and centre. And yeah, like I was fundamentally disconnected. A beautiful analogy used of the city, you know, I felt so isolated in the city and couldn't communicate what I needed. So when COVID happened, there was this really kind of, because the culture and the society and the narratives had gone, like the attention had to go inward in a way. And like, yeah, I did continue my work as a therapist and learned so much through that. But I mean, and this will come into the journey, right, that entailed from that year. But the big realization for me is the really, you know, if we even step into the realm of leadership, if you even think about being able to share something, it has to be embodied. It has to come from like my experience. And that was like the confrontation for me, was if you want to consider yourself as someone who's playing a role in contributing positively to the world, however we might define that, then you better like get it right in here first and be really sure about that before you adopt a position of, hey, like, you know, this is how we should be doing things, or I've got the answer. Should we ever adopt that position? I'm really not sure. And this is coming from experience of this last year of being around people who want to impose a way of being on the world. So I guess what I'm saying to your kind of question is, you know, being a therapist is humbling. It's really humbling because you think you know, and then you go into the complexity of someone's life, and if you really listen, you just see that there's just so much there in the human mind, and my projections and my limitations and my expectations. So yeah, maybe the war analogy metaphor isn't, there's something about, I don't know, just the word humility has come up so much for me. So I don't see myself as like a soldier on the battle line or a chaplain. I see myself as like, you know, a leaf or a thread within some kind of fungi network.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, it's like Bhagavad Gita is set in a battle, and then the main character Krishna, it's in the midst of, or like on the verge of the battle, in the midst of the battle, then he has this inward journey, spiritual dialogue. And so I think maybe that's more the direction of it. Although me and my friend Joseph, who comes on Sense Space a lot, we've talked about like infinitesimal courage. And sort of seen that as like, okay, what's the somehow like transcending and including the war metaphor, like it is a war, but it's a war at the level of like overcoming with courage in the heart, in like a specific, very minute act of like bravery, truth-telling, or noticing. Noticing I am being captured by some subtle undercurrent within myself, or within the virtual worlds that I'm participating in.
Yeah, well, if there's any place that's good for a war zone analogy, then it's social media, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. Like, it's been absolutely insane the last year. Like, almost mind-blowing to be fortunate enough to look at it from a distance. But I think for many people, this experience has felt like a battle, because all the things that have exploded around culture or politics or racism or any highly charged topic, people have just been going to battle at their computer screens and their phones, and our brains and nervous systems have been exposed to like all this horror and aggression and activation. Like, yeah, I'm quite sure on a physiological level it feels like we've been through a battle, but it's so artificial.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not real. You know?
It's that like very subtle frazzling and disassociative effect upon the nervous system of like this little, you know, phone on the table, and just like, oh, I'm present, and then I'm in, and then I'm inside, and then there is
the helmet on. Yeah.
Even if you're not in that part of, you know, I feel pretty lucky, like my feeds, my little digital worlds aren't as crazy as, you know, what Hannah's connected with and perhaps what you're connected with, but it really is just at the level of engaging with the mediums of what's going on here in the moment as I'm using this phone. What am I actually looking for? What's missing? And that we can let that sort of take us from the phenomenological and the day-to-day down to the deepmost needs of a person,
right?
The deepest fulfillment. And how deep is the deepest fulfillment? Well, that's the spiritual traditions and the wisdom traditions, and that goes all the way down. But the consequence of sinking into those deeper needs is shifts in how you relate, how you show up, and a willingness to change that. And so often the avatar, or the social avatar, or that, you know, the avatar that we show up with our family and our community that we grow up in, that's fixed. And this period of great transition, this period of sort of awakening to where we are and the massive acceleration and distraction and disassociation, the absence of places where a kind of deeply felt emergent speech can take place.
Yeah, even putting it like more simply, like just genuine conversation.
Yeah.
And again, like coming even away from the spiritual, like the basis human needs, right? A need for safety and security, a need for connection, a need for attention, right? These are biologically wired into us. And obviously there's a lot of people that would propose a need for meaning, and there's a lot of research behind that. Well, you put people in the middle of a pandemic where you strip away all those things, then lock people in their homes, and then which puts you in this super vulnerable state, really, and then the only interaction we have is these digital things, and they're either going to be strengthening the thing that you believe because we're latching onto a community, or, as you mentioned, we're being exposed to all of the world's problems at the same time, which the brain is not designed to build. We've never been in a position where we've had access to such a broad range of information before. You know, it was our tribe and our neighbourhood, not every single problem in the universe all coming at the same time through a digital medium that hacks your neurophysiology in a way that we still don't fully comprehend, right? It's like, but it really does things to the brain. And that's just going directly into the unconscious mind. So, yes, people are frazzled. Yes, people are struggling. And what a light it has shone on the different realities we all inhabit. Like, if I'd have stayed in Birmingham for the last year, I would be a completely different person than who I am right now.
Yeah.
Right. You know, on my own. All my kind of traumas coming up without a container to hold them. And this is the other thing, right? You strip away distractions and narratives, and also some kind of symbolic parental relationship, which was the government, right? Like this father role of imposing rules on people, and our sense of safety is threatened. It's just going to bring up all of your stuff, like all of your traumas and patterns and ways of disconnecting and dissociating. It's all going to come to the surface. And like, I was so present to that. I was like, well, where are the containers for this? You know, where are the containers? And there weren't many. So yeah, I think it's been really, really hard. And, you know, just to weave into that, I also think for some people, and maybe more than what is being shown, it's been an incredibly expansive and life-changing experience, and I would count myself as one of those people, which I just feel like so grateful for as we reflect on how this could have gone, you know? And it's not to go too far on this, but just this was the beauty in, if we bring it to our experience, of looking back at our conversation and being like, it was really, I mean, I call them micro decisions, they felt very big at the time, but it was really these small decisions going back years that led to this experience being the experience that it was. And it's like, and I've been in positions in my life where I've looked back and the decisions that I've made have put me in a worse position. And this experience really has been one of the first times in my life where I look back and I'm like, thank you, past me. Like this, you know?
That's like really positive feedback from the universe as you're participating with it.
Yes. Yeah.
I must tell you that you haven't just lucked your way. There's something about your way of making decisions that has helped you to be better conformed with reality.
There's a sense, right, that there's, and this is what I'm reflecting on, because it's like you want to keep a groundedness, but when we had this conversation a year ago, you know, we said, not surprised that this is happening, and the communities that we seem to be interested in, and this is a really fascinating phenomenon because Jamie Wheel, Daniel Schmachtenberger, that community have kind of gone more mainstream through the pandemic, especially Daniel Schmachtenberger. Like doing talks at Oxford, and for the Global Governance Project. And it was like, we were in that thread like 3 years ago, and these people were saying like, hey, something's going to happen, and you might want to cultivate an inner structure that can kind of look after you. And it's not easy. Like it's been really hard. But there is this sense of, hang on a minute. If I listen and take risks, you know, like do the thing that probably not everyone's doing, and there's not really a path there or a map, like you're kind of doing it as you're going along, and you know you're going to walk into a woods and be like, not going to do that again. But you're mapping in the moment. My experience, and I feel more confident in this now, is you'll have really profound life experiences that are deeply meaningful. Yeah, and that's great.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, the walking into a forest accidentally thing is like, you know, that happened to me and Hannah a few weeks back. So.
Yeah. Literally,
walking through like nasty brambly bushes, and is there a path here? Have we completely fucked up? I wrote a little essay about navigating the hyper conversation intuitively, but that was really sort of a guise for me to talk about an intuitive approach to living, which I feel is very much grounded in this experience of like going out somewhere you haven't been before and figuring it out. And me and Hannah have been doing that, and it can be really intense, and we end up like hiking like many kilometers to get from one place to another, or you have to become aware of really foundational things like, do we have enough water?
Yes.
Should we use water to wash our hands if we only have a limited amount? Really grounded things. But we found the most profound, beautiful places together. And it is...
Literally on a walk.
It's heartening, and it somehow consolidates your capacity, but it's not by learning a specific way of doing things. It's deeper trust in inner navigation, I guess. But now sort of exacting that up to the world. And that's sort of been our experiment as a couple, and having done the whole journey as a couple, like the learning relationship that can happen there is fucking incredible. But I think we, having recognized the degree to which our reality is becoming distinct from all the other realities, and this was true for most people, I think, was with that withdrawal into the cave of the home, everybody's cave was different. And if your cave was a little bit out of whack, and it stayed out of whack, then like a ship, you know, in misalignment, it's going to go way out over here. If you were in a, you know, imbalanced relationship at the start of the pandemic and you stayed in it, that's going to really have built up. So, we went on a journey of a real deepening of communication, and as I was saying before, like the challenge is coming just when is proportional to what you can manage. But they do keep coming. That's the other thing, is this path that leads you to beautiful waterfalls and deep companionship and fellowship with whoever you're walking it with is not an easy path.
Yeah, but that's what also makes it so beautiful, right? Because, that's life. Like, it's really hard. And that is the amazing thing about it. Like, that's why we're here. And if we can just be open. And when I say that, I don't mean hard as in there's a lot of unnecessary suffering in our world. There's a lot of suffering that's just like, this shouldn't be happening. You know, we shouldn't have the amount of poverty that we do, like with the amount of money that's in the world, or we shouldn't have, you know, younger people that I work with, where I just think basic education, basic psychological education in the school system would profoundly change the course of these. And I want to make that point because, you know, there's this kind of like glorification suffering, and I agree, like there should be this. I think Viktor Frankl says like one of the ways to make meaning out of life is to realise that suffering is a part of it. But it's a certain type of suffering that comes with, you know, being in and of the world and working hard within the world. It's not the kind of suffering that comes from turning up at a job that you despise every day and staying there. Like the hard thing to do is to leave and trust it's going to be okay, but to work really hard to make it okay. So I just wanted to make a distinction between that, because I think there's a kind of suffering that comes from shutting down, and you know, the systems that we have also perpetuate that, but we have a lot more power than we realise. In my experience, you know, over the direction of our life, and there's certain privileges that can come with that statement, but you also read stories of people who come from the worst conditions and have managed to, you know, create something very, very beautiful and amazing in the world, and that's super inspiring, and I think that's part of the human journey. So to say to your point, it's hard and good. It should be, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to be able to take it to that level of like, what should life be? What could life be? And to have a conversation at that level. Having, you know, it felt as if I had suddenly died during my last psilocybin experience. To like it felt as if I had really stepped back through really fully stepping in, which is interesting. But getting to a place where you can really put everything down and really let go. And really connect with some like ground reality there, and to like have that sense that it is all ultimately okay. But then to return to the struggle, to return to the landscape that you're in, to return to, okay, this is my life, what am I going to make of it now? That's sort of where I'm finding myself. And I know the suffering is not over, but something about like really letting those experiences happen, where I've sort of dropped down to the bottom and connected with the depths of the darkness, or the depths of the suffering. I think that's when you can really begin to, first of all, find some like ground that you can bring in to every single social situation and conversation, when you can be in the presence of, you know, other people's suffering and other people's difficulties, and have that ground in yourself to then make space for it and connect with it and speak to it. But also to then draw that up, like this is the rooting, and this is the branching outwards. And that's really important too.
Yeah, and acknowledging, like, I mean, my life hasn't always been, my life has got considerably better over the last year, like almost unbelievably. Like, I'm like, oh, this is insane. And so being able to be in a position.
Same.
It's crazy. Being able to be in a position where you get to have those profound experiences, like to go on, the metaphorical mountaintop, as Jamie would call it, and be like, this is, I know you took psychedelics. I went away with my friend to the countryside in Germany and took psychedelics. Beautiful countryside. Like walking up to the top of the forest hill, I told you, right, like in the middle of the forest, sobbing, surrounded by nature, and just being like, I am so lucky. I am so lucky right now. What do I do with that? Like, what do I actually use this energy for? Because it is a privilege to have access to those things. Not everybody does. There's been periods of my life where I've had, no room for that kind of stuff. And my parents and the generation before them, who basically sacrificed their lives to work and, give me the slight breathing space to be able to explore these. And I think this is the question to sit with. It's like, right, I have access to something really, really special. I get to ponder these things. I get to sit here with you and have these conversations. What, as you say, coming back down to earth, what can I do with that energy in the world? Can I make it a little bit better? Can I support another? Not in this kind of, I'm going to come and save the world and I'm going to do this, and egotistical projection, I am the hero, which is very dominant in spiritual communities. Very dominant. But in this kind of humility is the word, man, and this humble, thank you, whatever's allowed me to access this. What can I do? And I will, not gonna, it's not martyrdom, and it's not, but it's making a contribution to this earth. I'm reading a book at the minute that talks about like ancient civilizations and their philosophy, and it was like in ancient Egypt, who, you might know about this as well, the only reason we can understand Egyptian hieroglyphs is because they came together with the Hellenic culture, the Greeks, and the Greeks converted it into Latin. So the reason we understand ancient civilizations into Greek, not Latin, is because of diversity and communication between different cultures. I just think that's a really beautiful thing to know during a time of polarization. But they're like, one of their big philosophy was debt and paying back. Like, that was a huge thing that influenced these cultures. That was like, if you take, you give back. And we have this conception of debt as a negative thing, but it's almost like, no, making an offering to the world of service.
Right, that's the word that was on the tip of my tongue.
Offering, yeah. So that for me has just become so important to hold on to. What can I offer? What a beautiful question. Not what do I want, what can I offer? And that will also architect your life a little bit, because what can I offer is like, well, what am I good at? And then, rather than what do I want from the world, or, can I be this, or, a YouTuber or a TikToker or whatever is now becoming popular. What can I offer humbly, graciously, gently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how I got there, but
no, I'm feeling a thread. Yeah, with that, becoming a YouTuber or becoming a TikToker or whatever it is, I feel that's sort of characterized by like having the idea of the thing and shooting towards that thing blindly before you've let go of the thread a little bit and connected with what am I as a unique expression of the universe from my context, what am I drawn towards? Curiosity for me is perhaps one of the highest virtues that exists.
100%.
To cultivate that and to find what that is and to follow that incredibly winding path. I mean, very, very winding. For me, history degree, politics, whole journey with Islam and understanding jihadism and thinking I was going to be like a jihadism think tank research guy. And reaching the end of that path and writing this dissertation and actually ended up making this huge orthogonal shift into the transformational potentials of dialogue and what it is to be deeply connected with nature and have nature inform our metaphors and
beautiful.
Like what's the depth available in the sensuous and how much more sensuous can things become when we get through those layers of disassociation and connect with all of it and then connect with one another, erotically, conversationally, playing at those liminal edges. So, that's been quite a journey. But somehow when you get really far along this winding path and you look back and there's a sense that it was drawing you towards the realization of yourself. And so you might have a gaping blind spot in your personality, which everybody does at some point, coming from the culture that we do, the families that we did. Following that curiosity has naturally led me on this weird path to it almost, you seek and you connect with that seeking and it leads you all the way back around to the thing that you left behind in your childhood or whatever it was, like the part of you that you were missing, the part of yourself that was nurtured or spoken into at a very young age, suddenly 2 decades later, somehow it comes back around. And so there's a strangeness to all of this, but it's also incredibly meaningful. And the great part about that adventure is that like having developed a certain trust in that, or having played it out enough times, following intuition, not knowing where it's going, facing challenge, responding to challenge, growing, connecting more, getting these, having these beautiful, clarifying dialogos experiences that it's like, oh, it really does all make sense. In the most grounded sense. But then, I always lose the threads. And part of that is that I need to also lose the threads and not know where it's going. And yet deepening the curiosity, deepening the faith, the religio as that kind of right coupling with reality, faithfulness in reality. Just like you can be faithful to your partner without you know, a marriage wouldn't be very good if you knew where everything was gonna happen beforehand.
Yeah.
It would be about the journey and the different challenges and the beauty that's found.
You know, faith is such a good word as well, like, and I wonder if the culture had become so rigid. I had this experience when I was very young, like, of just thinking, this doesn't make sense, like, it's too, you know, it's kind of a caricature now, but, you know, you follow that, you do this, and you do that, and then you do this, and then you've completed life and you get the happiness. And I think our culture narrative was make money and then you're done, like you've completed it. And then I think enough people in Western society did that and were like, actually this isn't the thing, and by the way we're sort of killing the planet as we do this, and we're also super disconnected. But this conditioning of the human soul, that you go into this culture and you just follow this map and you follow this path, and it's never really you making the decisions. So I'm going to do this because this is what you're supposed to do, and it's not a judgment like those well, actually I'll correct that, there is a judgment for me, and because we think judgment is negative, but you need to judge your environment to say, I'm not going to do that. Right. So, from my subjective experience, there is an assessment saying, I don't think that that's going to lead to a meaningful life to follow. And been around enough people who may have, who have expressed their discontents with it. So the point that I'm making is, like, I think our world had become disenchanted, very rigid, very mechanical. You know, we'd projected this sort of machine metaphor onto it, and we'd become that. And we are now in that state of that story's collapsing, and we're all like, whoa, you know, we don't know what to do. Everyone's having to learn how to be with uncertainty and not knowing. Yeah, take a breath. And what do you reach for in those moments? You need faith, but for me, it needs to be a very particular type of faith, because what can also happen, which Jamie I'm the fanboy now, architects beautifully is, okay, well, when one narrative collapse, people will just jump to the next, and then you get fundamentalism, or the return of dogmatic religious thinking rather than mystical. You know, because there's different types of religion. We do have the state and the church, which was very impressive, or you have, you know, Gnostic, Sufi, Taoist, undercurrent types of experience, which were very sort of anti-state involvement. So for me, there is something very mystical about this period, because it's about cultivating that inner trust, and the reality being is like, hey, there is no path there, guys. We don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years. No one can predict it, and there's going to be a tendency to try and grab the quickest narrative that offers safety. Can we just wait? Can we slow down, you know? Just observe, just watch, do the stuff you need to do, you know, make your money, look after your family, but don't rush the narrative, don't grasp a metaphysics so quickly. Be in that sort of transition space, because it will, my belief is, it will transform you, and you will grow and develop through that. And it, yeah, that's just a thought on that. Yeah.
Laying down some deep rhymes there. Yeah. My goodness. I'm just going to check on our recording equipment and then pick up that thread and see. That's all going splendidly. Yeah. So we've been going about 53 minutes.
Okay. Wow. Not sure where we've originated.
Yeah, you've identified something really, really at the heart of what I've also sort of converged upon in the course of all of these conversations, and this kind of conversational mysticism, if you will, this kind of I think, as with any practice, there's different layers of depth that we can get to. We can have connecting with meditation or connecting with nature, connecting with the breath, but then there's a depth to that. That's what the wisdom tradition, so to speak, to is like, well, how deep could you go with the breath? How deep could you go with not knowing? Can you get to the depth of the mystics, the depth of Socrates, and beyond? So I've discovered that to be something that's available in conversation. Is like this dialogical, conversational experience where, we start out somewhere and we go on this meandering journey, and what's actually generated is a field and connection between us, and the deeper coherence that we can have between us, we can almost enter into a state of trust in which what is outside of the conversation grows more liminal. Like bringing somebody with you to that place together and hanging out in not knowing as a felt state. And that's very that's, I guess, associated with that, the feminine. I think it's something that you actually feel in your body, and it's not just a cerebral not knowing. And then there's these sort of cliff edges for different people at different times. It's like we get to the uncertainty, and then can we pause there? As you were saying, can we get there and not know?
Yeah.
And this really interesting first time dialogue with AJ from the Stoa, and he does like his own practice, and we had never spoken before, and he wanted to know about dialogos. He wanted the elevator pitch. So of course I didn't give him the elevator pitch. I led him down this conversational path, and it really got quite mystical and not knowing. And it was like, how much could we be here and connect with one another and trust in one another and not know? And so, and that's something with depth, and it's something which touches on the edges of our understandings, of our personalities, of our experience, which of course is where things can be revealed and drawn up and summoned up. And then you get I don't know what comes next from there. I wanna hear from you.
Well, there's also, I don't know how many, I'm going to use this word so many times, but there's something so liberating as well about being in that space, because your brain's not complex enough to take on all the world's problems. Your heart's not big enough to hold the world's pain. You'll never know. You will never know. That's a fact of life, right? Now, actually being in that space know, because
Yeah.
we can spend so much of our lives problem solving, fixing, projecting, and it's like just to own that reality. And then again, there's the word humility. The reason I love the word so much is it comes, I think it's Latin. The origin is from a hummus, which is hilarious, which is a very tasty treat, as well as a spiritual word, which means of the earth, of the ground. So to have humility is to be grounded, and to be grounded in reality is to know, I can't know it all, and it's not all my responsibility. You know? So many people don't do that. I didn't do that for so many years. Like all this pressure and all this, and I think this is why the mystery is so beautiful, because when you adopt, it's like, rather than arguing over the facts, how does an attitude of seeing the world as mysterious and unknowable, how does that shift my reality? What changes in my body? What changes in, like for me, the world becomes a lot more profound and beautiful. I stop trying to impose myself in conversation on someone who's trying to share something. You know, like can happen in relationships. Trying to fix the other. Or to the extreme, where you see whether it's an activist or a politician in this globalized culture that have the hubris to say, we know the right solution for all of these diverse human beings, and we're going to impose that top down. It's obviously ridiculous. It's obviously ridiculous. And then welcome to a disembodied culture that's trying to homogenize everybody but isn't really working. And in response to that, you've now got just the most intense levels of polarization and fragmentation we've seen for a long time, because people are that like angry and that feeling like they can't express themselves. It's only coming out in like hate and division. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. And what I heard in that resonates a lot, that I've been trying to understand recently, is the relationship between that knowing and like attachment. And that, like, to bring it down to ground, like in relationship with Hannah, like so many times during our journey, and part of what we have learned through iteration after iteration is catching ourselves in a knowing, which is attaching us to like, this morning it was like Hannah being like a bit overwhelmed with stuff and feeling like she had to keep hold of all of these different lists and all these different things. And there was like a known attachment to that. And my job as partner was to say, you can put it all down. But there's been so many other instances of my own struggle and fragmentation from reality arising out of this hidden knowing. It's like, I know what's possible for me. I know that this can't work. I know that I'm stuck, whatever the knowing is, arising out of a feeling.
Yeah.
So that's where it connects with attachment, I think, is I've got a feeling. I can't sink down to it yet. I haven't found the movement. I haven't like created the conditions to let that thing flow out. And so now this is here, and I've become attached cerebrally with a landscape. And we are collectively, the collective psyche, the collective experience is made up of the landscapes that we're all bringing and putting together. So the panic over climate change, the sense of enormous problem, we can't fix it, or if we can, it's like a super hyper technological carbon capture kind of thing. It's not at the level of deep relatedness, like returning to a ground of deep relatedness with one another and with nature. And so it's a messy impressionist painting I'm putting together right now, but I think what I'm finding in dialogue and in my own life is that each time I'm iteratively coming into these experiences where I come into relationship with the unknown on a very deep level, and that brings things up, that brings up blockages and challenges and feelings that need to be felt. When they're felt, they can be integrated and released, and then I can hold space for more not knowing. And that has been a great liberation of the self, of me, of who is Jacob, because that word, that name, our own name, is even that holds attachment to certain realities, and freeing, like bringing the unknown closer in is how I've been conceiving of it, inviting the unknown, getting more and more comfortable, like how close could we bring it in? Could we bring it in all the way to here? Find trust in ourselves, find faithfulness with reality, and then from that place, what would be possible? If we really don't know what's the map of possibility, what are the possible movements that we could take, how could we become? This is transformation. This is like this is the ground of transformation, I think.
Yeah. And and you're making, I think just something that comes up, also making things not accessible, but like when we talk about these things, and I'm thinking to myself, like there's this, as I saw a great interview on the Stoa, and they were like with the whole sense making, like these things have changed my life. They've literally changed my life. Like the whole sense making thing, or putting on, podcasts where people map realities so that you can understand things more clearly, or reading, old mystics. I really geek out on that stuff, and they'll talk about nature in a way, and I'm like, oh, this is so wonderful, but can sometimes feel inaccessible. Sometimes when I work with my clients, I feel it would feel ridiculous to say this thing when you get present to the reality of some people's problems, and it's like, well, how do you? And a lot of the problems come from the culture or terrible education systems. One of the biggest disorders at the minute, like panic disorder, anxiety disorder, which is where people develop fear of their own feelings because there's no education. And I've had this experience myself, although my coping mechanisms move more towards dissociating. Why is that a thing? With all the knowledge that we've got in our culture at the minute, why is not every child being said, here's your biology, here's your nervous system, this is how you're going to respond to threat? rather than them not having any clue, developing these disorders, these panic disorders, and then if they're lucky, being caught by a therapist who will help decondition that, rather than a medical system that will say, well, this is just, this disorder, take this pill and off you pop, which is reality. That's actual reality, on the ground, day to day, people's lives and experiences. So,
there's a lot on the line.
Yeah, holding that, me, and this is the thing for me, like, especially this year, like, sort of being in France and all these amazing places and wandering around in these realms and, feeling all connected. And then every day, sitting in front of my computer and going into someone's reality that, have lost someone through COVID, or are having these horrendous thoughts that they can't control, or, difficulties with their partners. It's like, well, what place does mysticism have there? How this is the do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And how do we make this stuff accessible in a way where this has just come up for me as a question, where people look and say, no, this is how I want to live my life, because it's not detached from my reality. It's not inaccessible to me because I'm an everyday person, reserved for a particular group who, I've been around these people who have enough money and privilege to just ponder the world and talk about all these beautiful spiritual concepts, but it's like, okay, what about the everyday person? And this experience for me has made me feel so grateful to come from like a working class background, to have one foot on the floor, and so just as you're sharing, that's the question that comes up for me. It's like, right, how do you bring these beautiful ideas in a way that says, hey, like, this will have a positive influence on your life and maybe the world that we live in, maybe psychedelics are supporting that, maybe the popularization of these ideas. It's just a real big thought for me. Gabor Mate suddenly becoming like a media sensation, and his ideas are like clearly coming from mystic, ayahuasca influenced realms. This whole like changing your personal narrative and changing beliefs. It's very mystical, but it's becoming scientifically validated now. So this is really cool and exciting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just something that came up for me. It's like a modern mysticism. You want Socrates with a pint of ale and a hipster moustache. For the modern day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you for speaking to that, because that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having that connection to where you come from, ordinary small town England, and who I was as somebody who grew out of that soil. As I've taken this path in the last few years, and really going to university in some sense is already is stepping away from and towards another world, another class. But then going into that and having experiences with psychedelics, having experiences with transformational practices, this stuff takes you into a different realm of possibility. Doesn't take you up into the fucking clouds. You still got to deal with reality. But the question comes up, and I think I'm feeling like a both and coming here of like I want to show what's possible by way of people will know me as I was, and they'll see me where I am, and they'll see that I've made a life doing something that people couldn't have conceived of as, oh, you can do that and be prosperous and make an impact and feel really connected. Showing people that that's possible, that's sort of the right kind of radical deviation from the norm. But there is this matter of, are we connecting? Are we translating? Or are we retreating into specialist, cool, subcultural niches? So much of what we've benefited from could only have happened through its incubation in these subcultural niches of like all of the, not all of, but a lot of the curious, disaffected people coming together and finding ways of being together with one another, and wise teachers and so forth. I talked earlier about that bringing in of the unknown closer and closer, and I think that can be really, really helpful in this matter of reaching people as such, because that liberation by way of not knowing and changing in dialogue with it has afforded me shifts in personality, shifts in embodiment, shifts in forms of expression that I didn't have before. So those are channels that I can reach, and I can move my hands in relationship with how I'm feeling and speaking, and I couldn't do that before. So this is all capacities that are afforded by way of taking this path, that then give not even advantage, like they give capacities to reach people on fundamental levels. And I also feel there's a shamanic component to this, of being the person that can move between contexts, and being yourself rooted in something which is beneath context, and then becoming a deeply responsive instrument to context. And so when I show up here with, showing up with a family member or whatever it is, conversation about some basic thing, some basic life challenge, relationship challenge, to realize, they might be starting here on their journey in that knowledge base, and you're up here. It's not going to be helpful to come in with all of this stuff.
Exactly.
You can afford people listening.
Yes.
Like, can I embody the insight as wisdom? Listening, noticing, sharing those insights from direct experience. I think that stuff is quite grounded. Being connected with those direct experiences and feeling them and integrating them and being able to share them in service of other people, that's translatable.
Yes.
I think.
Well, it's such a good point, also acknowledging that's the real work, to hold that space for your family, especially your parents, because that's going to be the most triggering element, but that sense of, and this is why it's like an experiential philosophy, it's an embodied way of being. Nietzsche talks about that, right, where don't give me your abstraction, give me things that I can use in my day-to-day life as a way of being, as a way of philosophizing around the world. This, like for me, it's I would say 4 years, 2, 3, 4, 4 years of really submerging on this thing, this path, like going to the gatherings, whether it's Rebel Wisdom, taking psychedelics, travelling, living in community, training to be a therapist, and having these tools, you know, to be in a circle with people where they really hold the space, or to be in an environment, you know, really got this from the community here in Berlin, where someone genuinely cares, like they're really sensitive to what's going on in your environment. You know, that thing you needed, they've done, and you've done the same to them. And to be in an environment where that's present, it's physically healing. It's going to, you know, to your nervous system, but yeah, personality-wise and confidence-wise, and I'm like, oh my God, this is medicine. This is therapy, and it's radically changed my life, and I feel better, and I feel more connected, and I'm healthier. Okay, right, let me try and put those things into me, and can I have those things to share, and can I hold that space for another like someone held it for me, and what does it do? And this has been the gift of my work, to have this direct feedback, you know, of coming from therapy from a very different position, and people turning around, you know, it breaks your heart in two sometimes, but to say, yeah, like I could cry sometimes. Oh, I didn't kill, you know, I don't want to kill myself anymore, is what someone said. And you're just like, Jesus Christ, that's really, really sad. And amazing. You know, and amazing. And that's the humility, and that's the privilege. Nothing to do with class or anything to do with what we've been exposed to realise just how little some people get to experience deep listening or care or safety, the basic things that make us human. So can we bring that into the world? You know, what a gift, and have that as role models. When you look into culture, does someone quickly come to mind who embodies humility and care and sensitivity, particularly a man? I don't see any of those role models growing up. You know, you know, it's like the caricature is Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Yeah. If we're really lucky, we get Russell Brand, who's, you know, I'm obviously a big fan of, but still 5 years ago he wasn't that. You know, it's the antithesis.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, particularly for younger people, you know, care, sensitivity, safety, responsibility for the planet. Let's make those values important. Yeah, I just think that's so important. I don't know how I got there either, but yeah. Yeah. And own it. Be shamelessly sensitive. A friend of mine, what did she say? Confidently sensitive. You know? Like, there's so many judgments on people who care about, oh, you're a hippie, or when you talk about mysticism or stars or these things, that there's been a lot of judgments in our culture, and I think to confidently own it and embody it, and to actually say, no, I'm going to make a stand for these things because I think they're fundamentally important. I think that's a really important. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think you are, in your own humble way, doing that with your social, with your presence in this little pockets of conversation. Like just the other day you shared a video that was like, you talked about like having procrastinated on a project, and like you just fessed up that you've been grappling with that, and just hearing you say that was like, I don't know, it's like, you know, Charlie's this figure that I look up to in a sense, like I see what he's doing and I feel good about it, but he's also grappling with this thing, and that honesty was really, like, I think that's a powerful, those little things are quite powerful. And there's a responsibility when you've opened up to the possibilities in your own experience, when you've felt the depth of suffering and the heights of ecstasy, although I haven't fully reached them yet. Leaving space for more of that. Yeah. To realize that there are whole dimensions of human experience which are so limited. Limited at the level of literal food nourishment, but also nourishment of the soul. And the responsibility of having felt your soul be nourished, to share that, to, like, I think to have been so witness to mystery, something that tends to flow out of that if you don't go off and become a raging narcissist cult leader, is becoming an instrument in service of something greater than what you yourself could think up. What limited aspiration could I have for my life? And then to, like, bringing that not knowing in, bringing that heart connection to the reality, knowing that it is all ultimately okay, but also coming back to there could be waves of suffering and a worsening of this reality. If those players don't come forth, those live players, those people following that Dowie roots of the tree path to get where they need to be, to become the people that can be in service of the well, I don't precisely want to give words to what it is in service of, but to be in service of that. And that means the letting go of, like, your own constraints on who you thought you could be.
Or should be.
To take it back to fucking working class education structures.
Well, exactly.
And then maybe we can bring Russell Brand through, because he's a beautiful, beautiful example of that journey from working class, just traumatic educational societal context in Gray's Essex, to like the ego rock star, sex maniac, drug addict, then having his like left-wing Greenpeace, true like Noam Chomsky, Glenn Greenwald, red pill, whatever it was, and then gradually he's coming onto this wisdom path. And now you're seeing, Hannah was watching his conversation with Ben Shapiro, and I haven't seen it yet, but apparently it's really leading the way on what's possible in dialogue. And so Russell Brand's making a difference in people's lives, and we need more live players who can bring the joy and bring the insight and show up, and branching out more, becoming greater than yourself now, but in doing that, getting your roots down and coming into confrontation with all the little things, all those little relationships, all those little, like I'm being inframed, I'm coming out of my boundaries, I'm all of those things, getting down into that soil. And when I was in Harz National Park on the Goethe Trail, I was seeing all of these trees, the likes of which I'd never seen before, because they were on these rocky hillsides, and the tree roots were like octopus sort of tentacles, and they would be reaching all over and holding all of these huge rocks. And I look at that and I think that is I allowed this metaphor to take hold of me, and I think that's sort of what these live players, what these this leading from the ground, like that's, you can pull a lot more of your weight, much more than you thought. You can have that impact on all of these different things, and you can be like the expression of the coherence of reality, reaching into all these different pockets with everyone you influence and connect with.
And it's scary, to really take that seriously. Like theoretically, I totally agree with Russell Brand. What a risk he's taken. He's really, there's the spiritual journey, there was this kind of like, I'm alluding to this. Now it's just like, kind of straight truth, really. Things that would have been on a conspiracy website 5-6 years ago are now like mainstream YouTube, which is also a sign of the times. And like I even notice in myself, like the fear and the judgment and like, who do you think you are? All these things that show up. And then ultimately, what would it be if you just, and I think this is the inner cultivation that's required, because as you said, there's so many people stuck up there, and you get spiritual narcissists, you get cult leaders, you get like a very easy place to go. Or you can get way down in the dirt with just the heaviness of the complexity of our problems and the overwhelm and the shutdown. So, and we don't have the tools really in our culture to say to somebody, if you want to start messing with the conceptual frameworks that you've been conditioned into, you want to start pulling those all up, great, and be careful. Have a community, have values and integrity and look after your body. You know, this is something I've really been connecting with recently, like why I've started boxing again and working out again, because I'm like, if I'm going to meet the shadow, then, you know, I want to contain it. I want to have a vessel that can actually work with these kinds of energies, because you will have experiences. Like you will, you know, because we have coping mechanisms, we have defenses for a reason. You know, and we have culture that controls these human capacities for a reason. It's not all bad. So, and this is why Jamie Wheel, and I've mentioned him about 7 times, has wrote that book, which has the breathwork practices. What's the book called?
Recapture the Rapture.
Recapture the Rapture, thank you. Breathwork practice, human connection, have like a philosophy, so that you're not messing around with things and getting lost. And I think that's what I'm really sat with, and this is why there's such a hesitation sometimes around sharing, because it's like, well, I want integrity. If I'm going to share something, I want to be really sure that it's going to, you know, you can't control everything, and it's not about doubt, like you have to show up, and I recognise that in myself. But also, yeah, let's take this seriously, let's have fun, you know, play with it, but let's take seriously this idea that culture needs to change.
Yeah.
So how do we need to change physically? What are we putting in our bodies? Mentally, what am I consuming? Relationally, as you say, who am I connecting with? How am I conversing? What would it mean to take that really seriously? And my final point to weave into that is this sense of, you know, and not ideologically, not dogmatically, gently, humbly, because you are going to play with things that are going to make you feel pretty powerful. You know, you get in positions where it's like, I'm getting the things that I want here. You start to see what power means. Right? We're all the humble guy when we've got nothing. You know?
Right.
But when people actually start to get things and to influence, that's when the real challenge is. I think Jordan Peterson makes that example, like, you know, become a monster and then choose not to be one, rather than, you know, not to sound like being weak and saying, well, you know, I'm non-violent.
Yeah.
Of course you are. And it's not a criticism, but it's a sort of a gentle encouragement to navigate these things carefully and consciously, and then potentially create something that's very, very meaningful for yourself and others. Maybe. Are my thoughts that I've only just articulated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is for those who lean into what we've been describing, who continue on the growth journey and the challenge journey and the deeper cultivating of intuition journey and the what am I here to do journey. Of course, the challenge of, well, you make loads of money and everybody wants to talk to you, that might take you out of integrity. But the world we're in today and the world we're going to be in 10 years from now, I think there could be some real danger for people like us, you know? There was a lot of violence in the late 60s, and one of the main aspects of that was the leaders being shot and assassinated. The peace bringers were shot down in their prime, and that's also a perennial theme. You know, sacred cows get sacrificed, and if you are going to fully embody that love and commitment to that path, there's a possibility that the world's gonna bite back too, and being sort of prepared for that. That's why I like that you're getting into the boxing and being concerned with the body, because it's like we need both the letting go of I'm going to follow this path faithfully wherever it leads me and whatever the consequence, but then also I'm going to be fully engaged, I'm going to give it my all, I'm going to be fully there, and how can I be the one who is responsible and can care for and protect the things that I love and show up in integrity when times get really tough and shaky, which they will.
Yeah.
And not for everyone at the same time, but
yeah, such a good point. And two threads to quickly on that. The one is to always question whether you are the peacekeeper, you know, this assumption of being the good guys, which is easy to fall into, right? Because it's you know, everyone thinks they're the good guy. And that's, you know, even the most evil person has some kind of justification for it, and I think that allows, you know, I think this is a quote, it's like, evil is actually ignorance, you know, that's the definition, it's this ignoring what you could know. So keeping that sense of, okay, I'm not going to hold myself as the, hey, you know, I'm on the good guy team, maybe I'm not.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, but hopefully I can point towards in a direction that feels fundamentally good. And yes, as you say, I mean, this is a big thing that I've been sat with, because it's kind of like a reality split. When things are going well, you're like, you know, are things going to get worse? Because you're kind of insulated from it. And then you get these glimpses and you hear these talks, and it's just like, we're in a very shaky time. Rather than me saying climate change is definitely going to happen, and food shortages will definitely happen, or wars will definitely happen, because that can feel like too much. If I held them as a possibility, how would that make me change the way I am in the world? So it's the process of living into that reality compared to this is a fact and I need to panic. Yeah. And as I sit with that, and that's freed up a lot of anxiety, and it's more like, if I take this seriously and I start to take care of myself physically, if I learn some things that are beneficial in terms of what I'm eating or the food that I'm growing, obviously I'm going to learn a lot of permaculture when I go back to the UK. If I live more in the moment and say the things I need to say to the people around me, because God knows when. Well, whether climate change ends the world or not, maybe that's going to make me a fundamentally better human being, compared to I'm just going to sit down and continue binge watching Netflix and just pretending it's not happening, which was a really terrible myth or process anyway, you know? And I guess that's something that I've been working with, because, you know, we've been talking about climate change and I speak to a lot of people who are just overwhelmed and anxious. We don't know, which is what we were talking, we don't know what's going to happen. Everything might, you know, the world might just stabilise itself in 3 years and we just go on as normal. Or there's some technological innovation and everything's fine. Or not. We don't know. How do we want to act and respond, knowing that we don't know what the future is? And I guess that brings the power then back to us, and we get to ask questions about how we live in our life. Is again something that I've been thinking about recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Like bringing in that not knowing in a way that produces agency.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I will be in right relationship with that, whatever the outcome is, because I'm going to ground in it as a possibility. And I just want to sort of go on top of that and say, like, also to be careful with the imaginal. Like, I think it's very important to go through that tragic stage of like, oh, really feeling this, all of this could happen. Totalitarianism could happen.
Yeah.
It has happened. You know, we don't have to delve too much into the imaginal, because we can just look back 50 years or 70 years.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when millions of people were enduring incredibly awful suffering over a long period of time. But to become attached to the tragedy,
yes,
is also a failure of a relationship with not knowing. To know that it's going to be a disaster is hubris. To not know is the place of possibility. And I think from that place we can also then begin to play with the imaginal. And I think when we find more contentment in not knowing here, in the present, when we're actually trying to cultivate a beautiful life here, in the present, in true relationship with the tragedy of life, of our own lives, the thought and the imaginal and the world that is created from our instrument is going to be more beautiful. And the possibility will be created alchemically here, between us, between the other people that we're in dialogue with, between the art makers and the visionaries and the diligent organizers and all of those people. Thanks for doing this.
It's been a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah, really somehow like some continual themes running through, and yet we're able to sort of go out here and come back and like deepen the palette of this understanding that's emerging.
Yeah, it's great to just share these things as well, because it's like these are kind of like unconscious thoughts, and then to say them out loud and be like, okay, maybe actually this is important and this is what's going on in the background for me, and you know, this is why, like, just to acknowledge the environment, but like being like for me there can be a fear of coming across like egotistical, like that's my fear. But noticing that like a true safe space is to say all the things that feel important, and to trust yourself enough to know like as you were saying, like about attachment, and to actually put them in a space that's open and recorded, it's just a good feeling, because you can own what's going on inside of you, and then trust like the feedback in the process. It's a really big realization. It's holding dualities all the time, like you say about the tragedy and the hope, and yeah, it's a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you're speaking those things forth. And one of the great realizations of the past year has been the power of speaking forth things in the company of others, in the ears of people who are listening, and it really lands, creating that coherence between internal and external, and speaking a possibility that is heard and then becomes somewhat more realized. And that's where it's at for me. And I feel you have a great contribution that you've already been making, but to come, to make. So I wish you well with leaning into and feeling against the edges of that discomfort, and holding the paradox and all of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, my friend. Yeah, same to you. This has been an absolute pleasure to explore together. Yeah. It's a real contribution to have these conversations, to be in that space. Yeah. Happy 1 year anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah.
For our last chat.
It's going to be me and Hannah's anniversary next week.
Okay,
So,
nice.
yeah, anniversary of my one-way ticket to Berlin.
Okay. Nice. Nice. Yeah.
All right.